Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar for Slate. Slate is an open source project that we announced officially at the Unite conference in April this year, and the project's intention is to serve as a starting point for Shopify theme development. It includes a number of boilerplate templates, like templates such as product pages, even customer pages, as well as a number of CSS and JavaScript files that are meant to help with developing themes for Shopify's online store channel. I'd like to take a moment to just go over some of the goals of today's webinar. We're going to learn how to start a new project with Slate. We're going to spend some time to understand what features and functionalities are provided out of the box. And we're going to see how Slate's helper scripts are used on storefronts and inside the theme editor. And when I say storefronts, I'm referring to the website your customers see and that the public sees. And the theme editor is the online theme editor that merchants and developers or yourself use to edit content. So, a bit more on what is Slate. Slate is a theme scaffolding and command line tool meant for developing Shopify themes. So the theme scaffolding component is the boilerplate templates and CSS and JavaScript files I mentioned. And the command line tool is a component of Slate where you can run commands in the terminal to start a Slate project and also send files up to your hosted Shopify site. The goal of Slate is to speed up developing and deploying themes to Shopify stores. So if we go on the public website, I'm going to go look at the what's included. If we go to the what's included, we see that line again that Slate itself is two parts. It's theme scaffolding and it's a number of commands. And Slate itself creates a functioning theme. The boilerplates create a functioning theme, but it's intentionally blank. There's very little markup and no styles that are applied out of the box. And this is done intentionally because we want Slate to be a starting point regardless of your theme's end design or intended functionality. And it's important to know a bit more about why we built Slate. If you've been developing Shopify themes for a while, you might be familiar with the Timber framework. And so the Timber framework had some of the same goals as Slate. It was meant to help with Shopify theme development, but ultimately we found that the Timber framework was too opinionated. It came with a specific CSS grid, and that was shown in the markup of the theme files. And also the Timber theme made some decisions that were very theme specific, such as shipping with a specific Ajax cart, even though there are multiple ways a theme could handle an Ajax cart. And the feedback we got from theme developers who were using Timber is that they felt starting out, a lot of their effort was spent on removing things from Timber to remove some of that opinionation before they could start building. And that's not what we want out of a starting point. We want theme developers to feel like the first thing they do with a framework is start developing instead of removing code. So when we set out to build Slate, we want it to be a starting point that will work for any theme, regardless of its end design or intended functionality. And also, we wanted to share Shopify's own internal workflow to an extent. We wanted to show how Shopify's own themes team works on themes. Starting your next theme should be as easy as typing a single command. Typing this command in terminal will generate a project with the theme scaffolding and a number of helper scripts. That project will look a lot like this. It's bare bones when it comes to markup and styles, and again, this unopinionated approach allows it to be the starting point of your theme regardless of its intended look. The templates itself will create a functioning theme, but this is just meant to be a starting point. And if you see on the left-hand side that we're working in what's called a source directory, the folder structure doesn't mirror that of what you see when you upload to your Shopify site. We have separate folders for scripts and styles. And Slate runs a number of commands under the hood that are essentially gulp tasks that will put together your theme CSS and JS files and move it into their own asset folder. And looking a bit more at some of those JavaScript files that get shipped with Slate, these are here because of the goal of Slate is to handle Shopify-specific considerations for you. This lets you get coding as fast as possible. And I'm going to show a bit more about these helper scripts in the docs. So go to the JS examples. I'm going to choose some image helpers from the left-hand side. And you can see here that there's a number of methods that are provided with this helper script. For example, getSizeImage URL. You need to pass two parameters to this method, or two arguments rather, which is the source of one of your files and the thumbnail size that you're looking for, 250 by 250. And this script will simply just return you what the URL for that thumbnail image is. Because as I said, one of the goals of Slate is to handle a lot of the Shopify specific considerations for you, and managing images and thumbnail URLs is one of those Shopify specific implementations. Another one that we'll be going quite a bit in today is Variant.js. Variant.js ships with Slate, and it has its number of its own methods and events. And you'll be able to see how we're using it in Product.js, which is not specific to Slate. It's specific to the theme that this project generates. So let's get started. So we're going to have to set up our computer. And to do that, we're going to have Node installed. And I'm not going to go through the install Node right now, but I'm going to show you where you can go to do that. So going to nodejs.org, we can just take the release recommended for most users, download that, and when I open it, it's on my other screen. You can just follow this setup wizard, and you'll have Node installed. And for those unfamiliar, Node is essentially JavaScript, but this is intended for building large-scale applications. So we're going to need Node installed, and we're also going to be working in the terminal to start. And so you're going to need a terminal emulator, such as iTerm2 if you have a Mac. That's what I'm going to be using today. Or there's Windows equivalents as well. Like I know there's a console too, and essentially you use any terminal emulator you'd like. And the last thing to get my computer ready is I'm going to have to download the Slate CLI from, and this is a Node package hosted on NPM. I'll just pull that up. So we're going to be installing Slate CLI. For those familiar with Grunt or Gulp, it's very comparable to that. We're going to have a command line interface where we can run specific commands. If you're not familiar with NPM that I'm showing now, or Grunt or Gulp, Slate might be a pretty good introduction. So I'm going to copy this command to install Slate. And here I'm using Terminal2. And just to verify that I have Node installed, I can type node v to see my Node version. And I can verify I have NPM installed. I have this version 3.10. So I'm going to install Slate globally. So this is going to run through. I now have Slate 0.9.1. That's here on the website. There's my face. So I know I have it installed. And everything I just did with Node and this last installation, you only have to do that once. Now I'm in a position where I can start setting up a project. So I'm going to use Slate CLI to create a new project, and I'm going to use that command Slate theme in my project name. Actually, I'm going to delete this. It's on my screen. Okay. So I'm on my desktop, and I'm going to do Slate theme, and I'm going to call this webinar. So this first line says this may take some time. It's not going to take that much time, but what it's doing, and we have a little explanation here, is it's downloading that theme scaffolding, but it's also going to be running npm install, so it also installs all its dependencies. If you're working on a project, it's a normal step to download the project, run npm install, but with Slate, we're trying to make a lot of things happen behind the scenes to kind of lower the barrier for entry. One of that is running npm install. Slate itself is using a lot of gulp commands, but we didn't want to make it that you have to understand what gulp is in order to use Slate. So webinar theme is ready. I'm going to go check it out. I'm going to open it with my editor. Oh, it popped up on my other screen. So here, I now have, here's that source file I showed before. And if I go and I check out theme.liquid, so Slate, I'm going to close some of these. This is the project theme. Don't save that.
And so just gonna take a quick look at some of the stuff Slate gives you, this HTML boilerplate gives you. So it's not just HTML, we're also using some liquid inside, such as we're using the canonical URLs defined by Shopify. If we come down here, some of the things, like we said with Slate, we don't want to have people reinvent the wheel every time. So we have a snippet in here called social meta tags. And if I open that up, you can see that with a lot of if statements, because what we're doing is we're generating the open graph tags and these Twitter tags based on the different pages you're on. So if you're on an article or if you're on a product page, we're going to generate the appropriate values for these different tags. So if you share a link to your product page on Facebook or on Twitter, it's going to know what image, it's going to have information to populate that rich text snippet, is it called, or rich snippet that's generated in those feeds. So the other thing I wanted to show in here is, so we have some HTML, we have some snippets, but when we get into these styles, what gets shipped with Slate? Well, for example, I'm going to open the theme.scss. Right here, this is my theme.scss. This is my main CSS file for Slate, and I'm using all these imports. This is using a node module to simulate a Sass import or simulate a CSS import, but what we have right at the top here is just a note saying you cannot use CSS and Sass imports in this file without a build script. That's essentially what we're going to be doing today, because while Shopify does compile Sass, it uses an older version, which is 3.2, and I have that mentioned on the Slate main doc site. And also this version of 3.2 does not support Sass imports. So we're going to be doing a lot of this work with Slate now to try to kind of overcome some of those shortcomings of the online compiler. So really quickly, one of the things we're importing is a settings variable.scss. If I open that up, this is here for kind of like teaching purposes and just to get you started, that we have some Sass variables that are pulling settings from the theme editor, but also we've just hard-coded some of them. And we've decided what our normal font weight is and what our bold font weight is. And if you've used other frameworks like Bootstrap or Foundation, this is totally up for you to edit. Another thing is we have some global partials, I'll call them. And these are things that the themes team has found that we're using on pretty much every theme that we just want to share some of our workflow. And they're all small little snippets, but for here, we're going to be using the same, if we want our inputs and our text areas and our slot boxes to all have the same border color, we're going to have a line that says, yep, we're going to use that border color defined by my set variable settings. And finally, one thing I want to point out is, yeah, that's our settings. Here's some global things, but also we want to work modularly, and we have some module CSS. So really, really simple. If I go to, let's say, that gift card page, we have just some CSS for design for the gift card page as we have it. Go to header. Again, super small file, changes as you see fit. These module ones are here for more for training purposes or for learning resources. And finally, what's in this thing is scripts. And so let's go through this quickly. The same way we were using imports, we're using require to pull in these different files. So I'm pulling in all my different Slate helper scripts. And I'm also pulling in some section-specific JavaScript. So if I go here to product.js, you can see this is the custom JS I wrote for my theme. And we have a very basic product.js for our product templates and for our featured products on the homepage that I'm going to be getting to a bit more later. So the last thing I wanted to mention is package.json. So if I collapse this, in package.json, right now there's just one dev dependency, and that is Slate Tools. And Slate Tools is again built by the themes team. And this has a number of commands for building from my source to my distribution folder, and also deploying my theme to my store. And the last update from this was yesterday by Chris Berth, my colleague. So first task is I'm going to use Slate Tools, I just showed quickly, to build and zip a theme. And I'm going to set up my store to have deploys. So here's webinar. I don't have a distribution folder yet. I'm going to open this up and I'm going to type slate build. And so it's running a task. It's building all my CSS, and it's building all my JavaScript. And now in the sidebar, I have a functioning theme. And just in case anyone's wondering, all these commands are documented. So the global commands are slate theme, what we use to generate our project, but then I have build commands like I just did, how I did slate build. And now I'm going to run slate zip. So now I have a new upload folder with a zip called webinar, and I'm going to load that to my store. So this is my old webinar. I'm just going to delete this really quick. And I'm going to upload the one we just generated. Make sure it's my desktop. Anyway, so this is what it looks like. It looks very bare bones, just like we saw on the documentation site, but it is a functioning theme. So that whole thing of building and making the zip and then uploading the zip, that's kind of labor intensive. Slate also has a way to do deploys, but to deploy straight from my local machine, my computer, to my store, I'm going to have to do a little bit of setup. And for that, I need to create a private app. And if you're familiar with ThemeKit, you'll be familiar with this process. But if you're not, I'm going to walk through it. So we have a config sample file. I'm going to rename this to be config YAML. I have a develop environment, and it's going to ask for a password, a theme ID, and my store. So my store is Slate Webinar. What did I just copy? Yeah. The theme ID I'm going to grab from, oops. Wow. All right. From this, and now I need a password. And my password, oops, is again make a private app. So I go into apps, and I'm down here at the bottom, I'm going to manage private apps. And I already have one made called Slate Connection, but I'm just going to generate a new one. I'm going to call it Slate Webinar. And one thing I'll have to do is make sure that it has read and write access to my themes and templates. Amazing. All right, read and write access. Oh, right. Cool. I'll just use my old one. Okay, so now in here I can type slate deploy, and it's going to start deploying all these files to the Shopify theme that I've uploaded here. Thing is though, deploys take a long time, or they can take a long time rather. I already have it set up. There's actually a quicker way if you have your theme already there. I'll clear this out. I'm going to say slate watch because I already have all my files up there, so I don't need to do a new deploy. So now what I'm doing is I'm just watching my local files for changes. So if I go into my source, theme.liquid, and for example, I'm just going to change my store name. Oops. Oh, actually, no, that's going to be in the header section. Oh, not store name, shop name. Yeah, so I'm just gonna say Nathan's webinar and hit save. And then if you can see this is auto reloading, and now my site page is reloaded with this change. So the site's now it says Nathan's webinar. Just gonna flip that back. And this will do so watching these section files, watching templates, watching CSS.js, doing Slate Watch will automatically deploy these changes. If you're familiar with ThemeKit, Slate is essentially running ThemeKit under the hood. Again, kind of the point I said before is we're trying to lower the barrier for entry here, so people don't need to necessarily know what ThemeKit is in order to use Slate. So I have my project set up. Let's make some changes. So I already showed how to change the store name, but let's start making our theme look more like an actual theme. So I'm going to hop to this page I have open right now, and maybe as a first step, actually, I'm just going to go into the editor and set some collections. Again, I want to make this feel like a real thing. So I got chairs, and I have sofas, and I have tables, and I'm going to hit save. And so now I've updated this. I'm just going to refresh this page. So there they are there. I'd like to make this list of chairs in a grid. So I'm going to go to my section or my template rather. I'm going to my template for collection. And where is my product loop? For product in collection.products. I'm going to use the grid that ships with Slate. Again, you do not have to use the grid that ships with Slate, but it's what we use internally. And I'm going to say that this is a grid item, and the syntax I'm writing right now is called BEM for block element modifier. Again, not required, it's a totally personal preference. So this is a grid item, and I'm going to say that it is 1/4. So this page is going to reload, and now I have these things in the grid. And I could use some modifiers where I could say 1/4, but then, let's say medium up 1/4, and then small 1/2. And this isn't Slate specific, this is just the CS framework I've chosen to use. Medium up 1/4, if I get down to small, it goes down to 2 by 2. All right. So what else do I want to do? I want to put a wrapper on my main content. Actually, in the interest of time, I'll just jump to the next one, which I want to highlight some things on sale. So here we see that this one has a sale price of $179. If I go into my code, I'm just going to clear this. And I have this thing like if it's on sale, I can say product is on sale. There's my translation and say the sale price. Well, here I'm going to now write some custom code. So in my theme.scss, I'm going to show how we can add our own code to theme.scss. Styles, jump into here. I'm going to import a new module that I've yet to make, and I'm going to call it car.scss. I'm just going to hit save. I might throw an error because that doesn't exist. But I'm going to go into my modules, and I'm going to make a new file. I'm going to call it car.scss. And let's say the card price when it's sale, I can say the color is fire brick, kind of like a red that's on sale. So I'm saving this, my page is reloading, nothing is changing here because I haven't applied this class to anything. And again, what I'm doing here, I'm showing how you can just, when we want to start working on a theme, we want to feel like we're always moving forward. So I just didn't have to strip anything out. I could just start writing my own CSS. Let's close the span. Hit save, and it's going to refresh. Oh, didn't close that span. There. So now on sale, it's Firebrick. It has that Firebrick red. Recap what I did. I just decided to make my own modules for cards because maybe I'm going to make a lot of these card type behaviors, and adding it to my build was as simple as importing it down at the bottom. So maybe I want to add some animation now. So when I hover over a card, where'd my card is? Let's go. I'm going to say if I hover over a card image, and hover, I want to transform, scale it down by 80%. That's cool. And I'm going to say transition all in a second and a half. So say that. Oh, and I actually have to apply that to something. So where is my image? There it is. Class equals card image. So now when I hover over it, it does this animation effect. That's cool. Now, if you've been maybe delving websites for a while, this might have raised some warning signs because we're talking about vendor prefixes. Because if I take this to CodePen as an example, I'm going to make a new pen. I'm going to paste this in, and I'm going to say, let's use auto prefixer because I'm worried about some of my CSS properties not working in certain browsers. So I'm using auto prefixer, and then right here, you can see the auto prefixer said, whoa, all right, I really recommend that you use WebKit transition as well as transition, and WebKit transform as well as transform. So auto prefixer, if you're not familiar, I was going to put prefixes. It's a job you can run in your build. It's going to put prefixes on certain properties. The challenge, though, with Shopify CSS that's using Liquid is that auto prefixer and these other and similar type preprocessors kind of freak out when they encounter these Liquid handlebars. And so we've included some mixins in our, so I'm going to go to Sass mixins. We've included some mixins to help address this. So for example, what we're shipping with Slate and that we use in all of our own themes is this mixin called prefix, where you need to tell, where you say the property, the value, and any vendor prefixes you're worried about. So going back to here, how I would do that is I'd say prefix, oops, no, adding include prefix, transition, all 0.5s, and then I'm going to do WebKit and the normal spec. And same thing with, oops, I want to erase it first. Transform, scale 0.8. Again, so what I'm doing here is I'm using this mixin we've created as a substitute for auto prefixer. I'm going to save that. This page is going to load. And it still works, and I just want to show you the compiled code. So if I pull this over, I'm going to look for card underscore image. And you can see here that our prefix mixin put both vendor prefixes, the WebKit we asked for and just the regular spec. So I made some changes. I put my collection in a grid. I highlighted something on sale by writing my own modules for CSS, and I showed how to use one of the Sass mixins that are provided with Slate. More about mixins, that there are some mixins about media queries, prefixes we just talked about, and one called visually hidden. And these all serve different purposes. So the one about visually hidden is, this has to do with accessibility for the most part. And sometimes we want to use this class of visual hide when we want to hide something from sighted users, such as a label of email, which you can't see above this, but still make it accessible to screen readers. And that's as simple as saying, oops, include visually hidden. So you can see here, for example, that when the icon fallback text, we're using this mixin that we've provided that says visually hide this. Conversely, we have one called visually shown, because in the event where you want to add a class to show something that was previously visually hidden. So that's just a quick overview of the types of mixins we have included. So recap so far, we showed how to install Slate and create a project. We've used some of the build commands from Slate tools, and we've dynamically reloaded our changes with Watch. We've added our own CSS, and we've just talked a little bit about the CSS mixins and helper classes that are included. So now we're going to talk about Slate helper scripts. Specifically, we're going to talk about Variant.js. So I have this video here of a common interaction on a web page. So if you change some of these product options, things change on the page, like the availability changes. So it's sold out. Now this new one you can add to cart, and this new one is actually on sale, so pricing information changes. This is a really common interaction. However, the JavaScript supported can be quite complex. And what I'll be showing the code in a minute is how we're going to use slate.variants, which is down at the bottom, to help manage this. And one thing specific I should say is that Slate scripts pretty much have no theme specific information. They don't know any, like this, the scripts themselves are written in a way to know nothing about your theme. You have to tell it about the markup of your theme. And because this approach is what lets the different helper scripts be used on any theme, because they make no assumptions of the markup. So, and as soon as I run slate.variants and give it with my options, I'm going to have access to a number of event listeners like variant change, variant image change, and variant price change. So what this allows me to do is variant price change, which is a custom event from Slate that I can rely on. I can then write my own custom callback functions. For example, here I have one that says this update product.prices. So I know this is like walls of code that happen in quick succession. What I'm going to do as a task to show how to use it, I'm going to add a variant SKU to the template of product.liquid, and I'm going to use Variant.js and my own custom scripts to update that SKU on variant change. So going into, like I said, we're going to go into our product page, and I know that this is a section called product.liquid. Actually, let's go to let's go to this product. So I'm going to put the SKU under the vendor. And something I'm going to do real quick just to make the page not so long. So I'm going to say this is a grid. These thumbnails are a grid, and I'm just going to make them grid items, and I'm going to say they are I'll say 1/4. Save that. So under the product vendor, I'm going to make a new area for the SKU. And I know I have this variable up top that says current variant. So whatever current variant I'm talking about, let's say the SKU for this. I'm going to open up that product in my store so you can see that there are in fact different SKUs for that. It's called Udon. definitely have a product called Udon. Here it is. So you can see here that I have different SKUs. This is 5.8, 5.9, 6.0, and then this one doesn't have a SKU, and this one has 6.1. So let's reload this page. Sweet. Looks terrible, but worked. So here I have 5.8, and when I start changing the drop-down variants, you can see that the image change is now black, natural is on sale, but variant is not changing. So let's fix that. I'm going to go into the scripts for product.js. And here's my product.js. And here I have all my selectors. You can see on this line here where I say this dot variance is equal to, and then I give Slate variance my options object. So I told Slate what the container of this form is. I've told Slate what the selector on my option drop downs here, like colors. And I've told Slate what the product JSON is. And so when I say I've told it is because at the top of the page, I just have a variable with an object containing all my selectors. So this can change from theme to theme. I've told slate.variance options here, and then I have access now on the container that I've told Slate where the container is. On the container, it's going to listen to the variant change event, and it's going to, which we're interested in, run the update add to cart state. That's this function down here. And what I should specify right now is product.js is unique to my theme. This ships with the Slate boilerplate. However, this is totally up to you to customize. You don't even have to use a file called product.js. But I'm just going to write some code really quick in here where I say that, oh, hold on, let's add this. I need a selector for this. SKU is data SKU. And I need to actually put that on my product template. Data SKU. I'm using data attributes because it's how we decided to work on the themes team, is to use data attributes for any JS functionality and also like identifying, including so data attributes that have values, but also just using data attributes as selectors for our JS. So I'm going to say, so if it is a variant, selectors dot SKU dot text, I'll say, is variant dot SKU. And save that. Now it updates. So I've gone from 5.8 to 5.9. If I go to brown, I jump to 6.1. Here, I'll just zoom in a bit so you can see. Now, if I was spending a bit more time with this, I would have make my little line of code here a bit more complex, where I have something to output if there is no SKU, because right now, I believe it's this one. It just becomes blank and the page jumps a bit, and that's not ideal. So in reality, I'd spend a bit more time to either make it say not applicable or have a little dash in front of it. But what I wanted to show here is that when I want to use Slate variant.js, I do not have to touch that vendor script. I don't have to go into variant.js and modify it based on my theme. I'm just using it to give it some information about my theme, and it's going to then give me back these custom events I can listen to. And then something that, as I was going through, that even inside my custom functions, like if I had the update product prices, I'm using other Slate commands like currency formatting, because a goal of Slate is to address a lot of Shopify specific concerns, and part of doing that is handling currency formatting. What I'm going to do is show how we can modify a more fully developed theme we're going to skip for images in the interest of time, but we're going to move to a more developed theme, which is a preset we're currently building for Debut, and we're going to talk about section themes. So here I have, this is by Clean Themes, a Shopify theme partner, and this is the expression theme. And here they're using sections to make these editor interactions so they can move things around on the page. And so this is when we're talking about the new editor that supports sections. And to help build these types of things, Slate ships with something called Section.js. So I'm going to fix a broken slideshow section. So let's go back to my theme. And I'm going to say, yeah, I have this production theme, Lighthouse. And yeah, everything's looking good. This is my store. I have this big gray bar in front of it because I'm supposed to have a slideshow here. Right? In fact, if I go to customize theme, you can see if I click on slideshow that I've like made a heading text. I've made an image. So there's something very simple that went wrong that I purposely made go wrong. But to show that off, I'm going to have to switch to a different project. Oops, I need to stop watching. Clear, CD up, CD Lightroom. Okay, and close webinar. And I'm just gonna, in the interest of time, I think we have like about 10 minutes left, so I'm just gonna move a bit quickly, but just showing how we can use Section.js. So if I go into my sections, I have something called Theme.js, and I have all these modules, and I have all of these Sections.js, and something because I helped develop this theme, I know that there's this other JavaScript file that's missing. So because if I go into sections in my scripts, I can see that there's a slideshow Section.js. This is in fact, I don't like that's highlighting. This is the theme specific code. This is the code I wrote specifically for that slideshow. And a simple mistake is I forgot to require it. That is, I forgot to import it. So first step, copy this, require slideshow section. Oh, and something that I just realized is I am not watching this project. I can type Slate watch. So here's it, open up a new tab. There's my gray bar. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to deploy that. But the other thing that hasn't happened is I haven't registered this section, because even though I reloaded it, it's still a gray bar. And this is something that Section.js does for us. Very quickly, I'm going to open up sections. And at the very, very bottom, there's this little register method. And what this is doing, it's keeping track of every section of that type and making sure that the JavaScript that we wrote for that section type is applied to that section. And it also makes sure that if I have multiple slideshows on one page, changing the slide on one won't change it on all of them. It helps like manage the code, the specific JavaScript functions for different sections from interfering with each other. Hopefully like that kind of makes sense, but I'll show you in real life. But how it works though is it's looking for, how it defines type, it's looking for a data section type. So if I go into the section I made for this, and it's called slideshow, I've written, and this is me as I've written as a theme developer, I've written this HTML. I'm going to copy this section type, and I'm going to use sections.register, and the type is this, and the custom function that I wrote, the constructor rather, nope, that's Section.js, okay with that, is called slideshow section, or theme.slideshow section. Because right now I have this JavaScript, but it's not being applied to anything. There, and suddenly my slideshow's back. So that's cool and all. Like, and all essentially I did so far was fix a broken area on my website. But really, where some of the power of this of registering sections comes from is these extra helpers you get. So let's open this up. And registering a section is going to give you access to these methods, very similar to how when we use Variant.js, we had access to custom events like variant price change and variant image change and variant change. Registering a section gives you these custom events, and what they translate to, oops, I need to click that, is JavaScript, Shopify sections, JavaScript API. If you've gone to this page, you would know at the bottom, I'm just going to scroll down, we talked about the theme editor having its own JavaScript API. Well, and then there are these types of events you can listen to, and we have information on whether bubbles, whether it's cancelable, some other items, what the expected action is. We've simplified this with Slate by giving you these custom methods you can just listen to. And so what's currently broken, I'll say, or wrong with my current theme is if I go to that section, if I go to the slideshow section, if I click on this first one, I expect it to pull that slide into view. If I click on this block, I expect it to switch to that block. So this can be taken care of pretty easily. I'm going to go back to the slideshow section JS. This is all the code that makes the slideshow work, but then I have this separate section where I say, okay, for each of one of these sections, slideshow sections, I have an onload event, and that's coming from this. I have it on block select and on block deselect. And I'm just going to copy paste that code. So on block select, and this isn't some like special code that works with Slate. This is the exact same code I wrote for the rest of my slider. Like it's using Slick Slider, it's going to use Slick Pause, very similar to the same code I was writing up top. Just now we can make these events be fired in the editor whenever we select the block, and then whenever we deselect the block, I want it to resume autoplay. So I'm going to save this. And if I come back to, well, actually, it's the editor I care about. It's not the preview, but the editor now. So I'm going to go to slideshow. Oh, wait, which one did I just click? Is that my production one or my development one? This is production. This is development. Go back. Customize theme. Come down here. Oh, it looks like it just rebroke something. What did I do wrong? This, sections.register. On block select, on block deselect. Well, you know what? This is a risky run when we do live demos. Why is this so broken? Theme.js slideshow. Theme.js slideshow section. Okay, this is back. All right, I got 1 minute to solve this.
It was your quote. If you just undo, it was the quote at the beginning of Slick to go.
Oh my God. This is the problem when you copy and paste things?
On line 34.
All right, I gotta believe myself right now. Hey-oh, so if I click this, perfect. So now when I actually interact with these blocks on the slide, the actual behavior in the editor behaves as expected. So I keep the proper content in focus. Boom, minute to win it, and I did it. The other thing we won't have time for is just the fact that like at Shopify, we have this overall goal to make commerce better for everyone. And when we start talking about everyone on the web, we very quickly start talking about web accessibility. And I just want people to be aware of that there's Ally.js that's shipped with Slate. So yes, there's some Shopify specific concerns, but then there's also just some web concerns. Like in this example, I'm using just the keyboard and I'm adding items to my cart. And the cart comes out from the side, but if you see that focus ring, it got shifted focus automatically to this new element. And the way you handle that is with the accessibility helper, it's something called trap focus, and you say which element to focus on. Also, HTML and CSS. This page we saw before, how we have some products on sale, and we say a price, and then the sale price and the actual price. But the thing is, how is the screen reader supposed to interpret this? Which is the real price? And what we have is a visually hidden class. It's a helper class. The classes that Slate ships with, and that you'll actually see in the markup already. There's very few, but the ones that are there serve a very specific purpose. And this being a screen reader will read regularly priced. So final thing I want to leave everyone with is that Slate and Slate Tools is an open source project. And we are still at version 0.x, so 0. All the different tools 0.9. And so you can go to the main website, which is shopify.github.io/slate. And from there, you'll get links to the different repos, and you'll see that people are posing questions and also letting us know what issues they run into. So something I'd really love if people would try out Slate on a project, and then give us feedback of how it's been, or things that happened that were unexpected, or ideas for enhancements for the future. Okay, that is all. Thank you very much.
So we have a few questions specifically about the browser sync and how exactly that works. Could you speak to a little bit about how browser sync works right now, and when you're making changes locally, like how those get pushed up and like how you're viewing them?
Yeah, I can speak a bit to browser sync. And the only reason I say a bit is because I didn't do the initial implementation, so I won't be able to speak to maybe some more technical questions. But a bit of the history of why we're using browser sync was the fact, like, there was a back and forth about these. There are a number of ways you could approach live reloading, and some of them involve having Chrome extension. We didn't want to go that route because we don't want to say another part of the setup is to install another extension, and specifically if it only works in one browser. There's things that involve putting cookies or putting a little bit of script in your theme files. We didn't want to do that either because we didn't want to, we didn't want to ship theme files that had some code in there that you definitely did not want in production. So then ultimately the choice was to go with browser sync.
I think more specifically, like when you make a file, like when you're running theme watch and localhost opens up, what does the workflow look like when you save a file? Does it go up to your Shopify store first and then get synced over to that localhost URL? Or how does that actually work?
Got it. Okay, got it. Yes. So when you're doing watch and you make a change, that file definitely goes up to Shopify. The URL, if I have it open, is localhost, but there is no local development. There's no real local instance of Shopify running on your machine like you would in WordPress. This is just making a connection to your hosted Shopify site, and this is the reason why I can actually get product information and like the proper images, and I can get the proper product pricing. This is not hosted locally. It's just pulling from your actual Shopify site.
Cool. Is the JavaScript written in Slate, written with and using jQuery, or is it all vanilla JS?
The most recent build we built narrative with, we switched to JavaScript and Lodash, but you know what? Let's just open it up. Let's go to the most, see the most complicated one.
And while you're looking for that, the Slate transpile ES6?
The Slate transpile ES6, Slate does, our Node, okay, so what we built in Node does, but there's no transpiling going on with Slate in Slate, so there's no like ES6 commands and ES6 syntax in Slate. To answer with jQuery, yeah, we're using jQuery in Variant.js. And kind of to get to the comments I meant before, that we have this stable release of Slate, and we're working on what we're calling like the next release of Slate that is taking out some of these dependencies. And part of that being like we're moving to more modern workflow, like using ES6, not having jQuery here. We're using Lodash and only importing the Lodash methods that we need. Yeah, so no ES6, using jQuery in this current build.
Does the watch command automatically deploy to your Shopify store? So like when you're making changes, it does deploy automatically, eh?
It does deploy automatically. And what I meant to show with the Lightroom example, I thought we were done it too, so I was just trying to motor it, is just from a workflow perspective, that yes, watch will automatically deploy, but here I have a development environment and I have a production environment. So since I have a couple more minutes, what I'm going to show here is, here in my feedback, it says initiating Slate deploy to development. This is documented, but I could do Slate, watch, and specify the environment of production. Let's hit that. So it's always deploying the files, and if you don't want to deploy them to your live site, then this, because you're testing things out, Slate will default, if you don't put an environment flag, it will default looking for an environment called development. And then once you feel you're ready, then I would start deploying to production. And even in this example, it'd be pretty annoying to go through file by file, all the files I changed on a watch command and deploying it. So what I would do in that case really is do Slate deploy environment production once I'm happy with my theme.
Is there a way that you can specify, if any, what files that you want to include or exclude from the scaffolding when building out a new Slate theme?
So no, you cannot. I'm well aware of that. I don't know if I call it pattern, but just like expectation that if you went to Foundation or if you went to Bootstrap, you can pick and choose, and they have an interface for a custom build. And we've talked about it internally. I don't think there's a GitHub issue about it, but that would fall under enhancements. But yeah, like for example, or I'll switch to Slate Webinar. One of the things we do is we have vendor.js and Slate Webinar, Lightroom, yeah. Oh, this is Lightroom. I want the webinar. So I'll say we have vendor.js, and we give people jQuery and Modernizer. And we're not even using Modernizer, but it's just there because like, oh, we know people will use it a lot. You can choose to include it or not. But if you want to build, actually choose which things to bring in, that makes sense as an enhancement.
I have another question from Denise. The theme gem allows us to work with unpublished themes. As far as I have seen, this is not possible with Slate, but it's a very useful feature. Will it be available in Slate?
I think, so the comment about unpublished themes, I'll back up. This is Lightroom development that I have up here in the top left. That was the theme I was deploying to, and that is an unpublished theme.
Okay, so it does work.
Yeah.
Good to know. Can we, Jessica asked, can we add our own helper classes as part of Slate creation, or do we have to add them in manually every time? Is there a way to like
helper classes. I'm not sure what that means. Whether it's classes already on the markup or if it's.
I think she's talking about JavaScript.
Can we add our own helper classes? Oh, I see. Maybe like selector classes. Wait, hold on. Let me do this. And again, something I was going to show here is in the Slate. So this was a Slate project, and I'm going to look at product.js, and you can see here that in product.js it gets shipped with it. We're using all data attributes. However, and I don't know if this is going to answer the question, but it's something I wanted to point out. I compare this to the product.js of Lightroom. I'm going to go to this, sections. No, wait. Yeah. Section product.js. The selector classes are all different. And this falls into that category where I said Slate knows nothing about your theme and you're going to have to tell it. So it's really the theme developer actually has to define what they want to use as selector classes or selector attributes. Because maybe you're going to use a framework that has its own opinionation about that. And that's the whole goal is Slate has no opinions of what your selector classes should and shouldn't look like. Maybe the themes team does because we say we want to use data attributes, but you don't have to keep those.
Is there a build process to concatenate or minify JavaScript or SAF?
So currently there is not. We're in the kind of like the version of Slate we're working on right now. We have minification in the build process, and that's totally fine for this themes team where we modified the Gulp task directly. But the goal of Slate is to lower the barrier to entry. So the conversation we're having is if we're going to have people minify, minify the JavaScript, or it's like also known as uglify, or use other Gulp commands. The current conversation is like, what's like the easiest way to have those entry points, to have those hooks into it. So this stable version of release of Slate doesn't, but that the conversation internally is, yeah, we're well aware there's value in it. So we're figuring out how we want to roll it out.
There was a question about support for Timber and ThemeKit and whether or not you guys will be maintaining them at all or fixing any major bugs anymore.
Okay, I think that is one I answered right before I switched to you, that Timber is no longer maintained. However, ThemeKit is still being actively developed.
And then, sorry, I'm just going through some of these. Do you have any suggested ignore files other than like settings data for the config? So are there any other files that you would suggest to ignore, like automatically?
Oh, so in the config file? Yeah, let's pull that up. Config YAML. So here I didn't have any ignore files because I wasn't running. If I were to run deploy on production, one thing I definitely would want to ignore is the things in my config settings JSON. Here, actually, I'll pull this through this. In my config settings JSON, if let's say I have a client and who's a merchant, and the merchant is changing copy, changing pictures in the theme editor, which is totally what they're supposed to do. I don't want my local out-of-date version to overwrite it. So I'm just doing catch up in case people aren't clear. So yeah, I would ignore definitely data. Schema, probably not ignore, because if you want to add additional settings, you want to deploy those. So if I want to add more drop downs, whole new like sections, this would be the general settings rather. If I want to add another color option, I wouldn't include it in my part of my ignore files.
So these files automatically, no matter what, are synced, like under like Slate Watch, but then unless they've been added to the ignore, correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now, if someone wanted to open up a GitHub issue and say that they think we should have settings data JSON ignored by default, yeah, I definitely have that conversation because I'm just kind of locking that in the back of my brain right now. But other files, no, there's no other if you try to like upload, let's say you had some file in your source directory that was, I'll say like Shopify will reject any file it's not expecting. So you don't have to tell it to, like, you don't have to have the same considerations as a git ignore file.
Back in the config.yaml file, there was somebody with a question about whether or not you can specify more environments than just like dev, staging, or production.
Yeah, for sure. And in fact, you don't even have to call it any of the, like, as I said, it is a convention in Slate. We're going to look for development, but I could call this production. I could have called it prod. I could have called it anything. And you can have as many of these as you want. And if you're also, I'm pointing to this store, but I could have the client site be production, and I can have these the password will have to be different because the two sites wouldn't have the same password for their app. But I'll have to say I can use my development environment as a store and my partner account, and when I'm ready, I can deploy it to a completely different store with a completely different theme ID, and you can have as many of these as you want.
There were also a lot of questions from multiple people about different frameworks and using different frameworks, like say, for example, Bourbon or Compass or even Bootstrap, and how to go about possibly like bringing those kind of things into Slate, or if you have any tips around how to use any of these things that use obviously like a different version of Sass or something a little bit more.
Yeah. For sure. There's actually an issue open in one of the repos right now about bringing in frameworks like Foundation and one called Materialize. And the issue that people are having is just super big CSS files are hitting this timeout on Shopify, because Shopify has this thing where if it's taking a long time to run a job, it will just kill it. So the Foundation framework, where someone, I believe, was including most of the Foundation framework, that hit this limit. And the ultimate advice I said is you can just bring in Foundation as a separate CSS file and it will be fine. But other people, like ones using the Materialize framework, they haven't had like it hasn't been a problem or a reproducible problem, because like they said they're having issues, and when I tried it, I couldn't reproduce, about just adding that to the bottom of your main theme.scss file. The challenge you're going to have, though, let's say you're working with Bootstrap and it's using Sass 3.3, Shopify will not be able to compile that because it's currently locked into 3.2. So in those scenarios, you would want to use just the CSS version, and if that's not palatable, which would be understandable, you'd have to compile your Sass separately if it's using something higher than 3.2. And again, in the idea of enhancements, we're saying, okay, what if we could have a way to have Slate do your Sass compilation? And where that conversation currently is right now is we just don't want to set people up with an unexpected surprise where we're saying Sass without the .liquid extension is, we're going to take care of it no matter what. But if the moment you want to switch that to a liquid file, you're going to have to make sure that's compliant with 3.2, which would be like a pretty nasty surprise. So it's kind of under this category of like of Sass compilation, trying to figure out what the best solution is for people. But you'd have to do it separately is the ultimate answer if it's using higher than 3.2.
Cool. And I think just because we are getting close to the end here, can you speak to any limitations right now that like people have seen using Slate with Shopify or any other things that you guys are planning on looking at in the future?
So just limitations or plans for enhancements, is that the question?
Yeah, like any current limitations for using Slate right now that you've like noticed from the community or like people have been bringing up, and then whether or not there are plans to like fix any of those or like or what you guys are looking at for the future.
Yeah, for sure. I think what's been great about opening up the repo and then having conversations with people at Unite is just getting a more clear picture of how people are building themes for clients. Because there's a themes team inside of Shopify, but our client is essentially the theme store, or our client is merchants, but we're building themes that need to work at scale and that we don't have hyper specific functionality requests. So while I have to say, yes, we're building themes, but we are not building the same type of themes. So questions like using different frameworks and using different SaaS builds, that's kind of like the top of the list, is like letting people modify Slate that reflects closer to the workflow they want. So yeah, choosing to compile your SaaS. Oh man, I just lost it. I was going for a different point and I just lost it. What is it? But hooks are like the biggest thing. To be able to have Slate at its core do something very specific, and if people wanted to do more, just having the proper endpoints to run jobs before and running your own custom jobs before and after. Oh, right. The thing, what I wanted to say about like kind of tribal knowledge and conventions is our theme.scss file compiles into a liquid file, a theme.scss.liquid, because we're saying, yeah, your CSS file is definitely going to be connected to the theme editor and pulling in color variables. But if you're building sites for clients, maybe they don't have any control over color variables. So it doesn't make sense for us to decide that every, what I have on my screen, every, actually I don't know if I'm sharing my screen anymore, but every theme that I am, okay. Every theme.scss is going to have to be a liquid file. And then conversely, we say, oh, we're never going to do theme.js.liquid because we feel that's not the appropriate spot to include liquid. If you're going to include liquid, do it on the data attributes. You know, so we're going to pull, like I'm highlighting here, we're going to pull this value from data attributes and not inside the liquid file, because if you have theme.js.liquid, the editor in Shopify has to compile that file again every time you make a change, which makes the editor feel slower. And so when we start talking with who we're building sites for, we are ultimately building sites that are going to feel very performant in the editor, because that's where the merchant's doing a lot of customization. But if you're building sites for specific clients, maybe they're never in the editor. And this isn't a consideration you have to worry about. So kind of a big roundabout way, there's some things we know about we want to do for enhancements, but we're just like learning other things of how people are expecting to use Slate right now.
Cool. Thank you so much, Nathan, for spending the time to teach us a bit about Slate and how Slate works. We will definitely, I just want to let everybody know, for those of you who missed the beginning or there were some audio issues at the beginning, we will be, like, this webinar was recorded and we'll be sending it out in a couple weeks time with hopefully any of those audio issues fixed up and re-recorded. So do not fret if you missed anything at the beginning. We will be sending this out, or if you want to rewatch, we'll be sending this out, right? And make sure to visit shopify.com/partners and sign up for a partner account if you haven't already. Thanks so much, everybody.